She traded herself for food and shelter, but the rancher gave her a wedding ring and built her a room. Snow Ridge, Wyoming Territory, November 1884. The gusts howled from the peaks, ripping across Snow Ridge like a creature armed with frozen talons. Flurries shrouded the settlement in quietude, dampening everything except the sporadic groan of window frames and the sizzle of lights behind iced panes. Eliza Monroe positioned herself under the overhang of a deserted shop, footwear drenched, hems rigid with rime. She had been trudging since first light, no destination, no possessions remaining to barter. The lodging establishment had ejected her that dawn. "Poor standing catching up," the overseer grumbled. Her palms, scarlet and fissured, gripped the borders of her wrap. The material could have been parchment for all the good it did. Starvation coiled in her gut, accustomed now piercing. Her mouth cracked when she breathed out. On the opposite side of the road, broth wafted from the tavern. Meat, roots, dense heat. Her vision burned, her limbs quivered. Then footsteps approached from her rear. "Well, well," a fellow drawled, voice sloshed. "What have we got here?" She pivoted. An unfamiliar figure teetering from liquor, overcoat frayed yet insulated, his exhale reeked of spirits. "A small one like you shouldn't face this chill alone." "I'm merely seeking warmth," she whispered. He smirked. "I've a blaze cozy cot. Happy to divide?" She retreated. "Please, no." His grin faded. "You have no choice, darling. Craving meals, a roof? You understand the cost." He seized her arm. She inhaled sharply, resisting. "I said no." She retorted, her tone wavering. "Don't pretend superiority." I think the woman declined. The words sliced through the gale, deep and level. Both glanced over. A gentleman advanced, lofty, wide-framed. Flakes adhered to his headgear and jacket. A faint mark scarred his cheek, but it was his gaze, icy, unwavering, that caused the inebriate to hesitate. "This isn't your affair," the inebriate grumbled. "It is presently. You don't realize who she is. I realize she's freezing. I realize she refused. And I realize you ignored it." The inebriate's bluster weakened. "She isn't worth the trouble anyhow." He released her and lurched away, swearing. Eliza remained flattened against the barrier, pulse pounding. The outsider stayed put. "You okay?" She inclined her head slightly. I'm unsure. "When did you last eat?" She averted her eyes. Without speaking, he removed his jacket and placed it over her frame. It carried notes of evergreen, hide, comfort. "Hold on," she murmured. "No one deserves to be chilled and famished in these parts. Not in this region." He extended a mittened palm. "Calder Briggs, I own a spread beyond the settlement. Nothing elaborate, but sheltered. If you're open to labor, prepare food, maintain order. I'll provide quarters, sustenance, and pay. Equitable and straightforward." Eliza paused, scanning his features for concealed malice. None appeared. "Eliza Monroe," she replied. And yes, he dipped his head calmly, firm. From his jacket compartment, he extracted a set of dense fleece mittens and set them in her shaking grasp. "No lectures, no demands." Then he pivoted and proceeded toward an awaiting cart at the road's border. Eliza gazed at the mittens. Then she trailed. If this subdued instant awakened something within you, press the excitement icon. To sustain tales like this galloping firmly over the prairies, the adventure has only commenced. The flakes thickened as the cart trundled from the settlement, axles moaning beneath the load of frost and hush. Eliza perched rigidly next to Calder, his substantial jacket still enveloping her frame. The scenery smeared into paleness. Evergreens drooped under the white. Far-off ridges like phantoms in the twilight. They exchanged no words for much of the journey. Solely the steed's respirations and the squeak of hide straps occupied the emptiness. "How distant?" she questioned eventually. Voice rough. 10 miles, he answered. Shorter if the path endures. They ascended further into the slopes. As the heavens dimmed, Calder ignited the lamp at the cart's front, its radiance gentle against the descending flakes. Eliza fixed her stare on the distance, but her mind swirled beneath. Who was this fellow, truly? Why accept her without inquiry, without fee? In her history, benevolence always bore a concealed tally, and yet he had not ogled, had not contacted her beyond what's essential. He had not even probed her background. It was disconcerting in its tenderness. At last, through the trees, the outline of a homestead appeared. Wooden fencing, a slanted barn, and Atwoo-story house with smoke curling faintly from the chimney. Calder pulled the wagon to a stop at the front steps. He dismounted, then turned and offered a hand to help her down. She hesitated but took it. Inside, the house was quiet. The entryway was lined with worn boots and a rack of coats. The floor creaked as they stepped in. The warmth of the hearth hit her like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Calder gestured toward the stairs. Up there, second door on the right. Eliza climbed slowly, the wood groaning under each step. At the top, she opened the door and stopped. The room was simple, but it was hers. A small bed sat beneath a window facing the mountains. The mattress was neatly made with a faded patchwork quilt. A wooden chest stood at the foot of the bed. A small stove flickered in the corner, already lit. On the windowsill rested a row of books, worn, well-loved, spines faded, but intact. She crossed to the bed and ran her fingers across the blanket, clean, soft. It smelled faintly of cedar. The lump in her throat rose fast and hot. She turned away, covering her mouth with her hand, but the tears came anyway, silent, stinging, unstoppable. Downstairs, Calder waited without calling up. When she finally descended, eyes red but face composed, she found him in the kitchen. He was pouring hot water into a tin kettle. There's bread, he said, and stew left from last night. Not fancy, but warm. Eliza sat at the table. The chair creaked beneath her. She tucked her hands under her arms, ashamed of how they trembled. He set a bowl in front of her. Steam curled upward, rich and earthy. It smelled like meat and thyme and something close to comfort. She whispered, "Thank you." He poured tea into a mug and set it beside her, then sat opposite, silent again. As she lifted the spoon to her lips, He glanced down at her hands, still rough from cold, chapped and cracking. Self-conscious, she pulled them into her sleeves. "Don't," Calder said, voice low. She looked up. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small tin. He opened it, set it between them. Salve cracks. Her fingers hovered, unsure. Headed, hands like that. They still got plenty left to give, to fix, to make things better. She swallowed. "I was a teacher," she blurted once. "I believe that," he said simply. She nodded, unsure why it mattered that he did. The rest of the evening passed in near silence, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock and the soft clink of cutlery. When she finally stood to go to bed, Calder nodded once. "Good night, Miss Monroe." "Eliza," she said softly. Hem at her eyes. Eliza. Then she turned, climbed the stairs and closed the door to her room, and for the first time in months, the door clicked softly into place behind her. Locked, not to keep danger out, but to hold peace in. The day settled into a rhythm, quiet and unfamiliar. Each morning, Eliza rose before the sun, wrapping herself in Calder's old coat before padding barefoot across the cold wooden floor. In the kitchen, she fumbled with the iron stove, feeding it logs with numbed fingers, struggling with the flue until smoke hissed out in the right direction. Her first pot of porridge boiled over. The second was raw in the center when she dropped a plate while drying dishes. It shattered across the floor in a cascade of ceramic shards. She gasped, kneeling to gather the pieces. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll fix it." I'll crouched beside her, picked up a curved piece of white china. "Plates break," he said. "So long as people don't, we're still ahead." She looked at him, uncertain if he was mocking her. He wasn't. Outside, she learned to scatter grain for the chickens, to rake out their straw, to carry water without spilling it down her front. The birds squawked and pecked at her boots. The cold stung her cheeks, but she kept going. She burned the stew again. Called her, said nothing, ate it anyway. When she apologized, he only said, "Cold stove's harder to learn than books ever were." And when the stovepipe jammed with soot and nearly smoked the kitchen out, he climbed onto the roof in the wind and snow without a word. She watched from the doorway as he hammered new shingles into the western slope, his silhouette sharp against the steel-gray sky. No coat, no gloves, just calm, methodical labor. That evening, when she returned to her room, a bundle lay at the foot of her bed, a heavier coat lined, sewn from old wool. She touched it reverently, fingers brushing the collar. There was no note, no acknowledgement. The next morning, a pair of socks, thick kick, handmade, appeared beside her boots. No words passed between them about these things, not a single one. The days remained cold, the house quiet, but something in her began to breathe again. One night, a storm came howling down from the hills, slamming into the rafters like fists. The fire hissed low in the stove. Eliza curled under the quilt, eyes wide open in the dark. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it dragged her down into memories she had tried to bury. Royce's hand on her wrist. The shame, the accusation, the look in her father's eyes when he chose to believe another. She woke with a start, chest tight, sheets damp. Her breath came in fast, shallow gasps. Moonlight poured through the window, casting pale lines across the wooden floor. She swung her legs out of bed, trembling, then stopped. At the foot of her door, something shifted. She stood, bare feet padding silently across the floor. There, on the threshold, sat a single mug. Steam curled upward, warm milk laced with cinnamon. Its scent rose like something from another life. She opened the door and looked out. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no creaking boards, just silence. She stared at the mug, at the gentle steam, and felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Not from pain, not even from fear, but from the aching, quiet kindness of it. She picked it up, wrapped her hands around the warmth, and brought it inside. As she sipped, the storm outside continued to scream. But inside, something had changed. She was not alone. It began with a name whispered at the general store. Eliza had gone into town with Calder to pick up flour, salt, and kerosene. He left her briefly near the shelves while he bartered for supplies at the counter. That was when she heard it. Just a fragment of a conversation between two old men by the stove. Said he was from Kansas, Blackwell, I think, tall fellow looking for someone. The name struck her like cold water to the face. Elisa's hand clenched around the sack of flour. Her chest tightened. Royce. She stepped outside into the bitter wind, heart pounding against her ribs. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, a different Blackwell, a traveler. But deep in her gut, she knew. That night, she barely ate. Calder noticed, but didn't ask. He rarely did. The following morning, Sheriff Langley rode up to the house, his horse frosted with snow. "Morning, Briggs," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. Stranger came through town asking about a young woman. Said her name was Eliza Monroe. Gave a description matches your guest. Calder's jaw tensed. What did he say he wanted? Said she ran off from home. That she's needed back east. Family matter, he said. Looked official enough, but there was something off. His name was Royce Blackwell. Eliza stood in the doorway, pale as the snow. Sheriff Langley glanced at her and softened. I didn't say nothing. Told him if he wanted to find her, he'd better have papers. He left toward the foothills. Said he'd be back. He tipped his hat again. Just thought you should know. When the sheriff rode off, Calder didn't look at her. Not yet. They stood in the silence between them for what felt like minutes. Then, softly, Eliza said, I need to tell you something. He nodded once. Come inside. She sat at the table, hands folded tight in her lap. Her eyes didn't meet his. Back in Kansas, I worked for the Blackwell family, she began. They were wealthy, powerful. Royce was the eldest son. I was just a tutor, reading Latin, a bit of math. She swallowed hard. He started bringing me gifts, a brooch, gloves. I told him I couldn't accept them, that I wasn't interested. One night, he cornered me in the library. I pushed him away. I told his mother. She didn't believe me. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. 2 days later, I was accused of stealing from the family. Jewelry went missing. Letters were discovered, all pointing to me. His word against mine. Calder's face remained unreadable. My father believed him, she said, voice cracking. He said I'd shamed the family, told me to leave before the scandal ruined my sister's chances at marriage. She finally looked up. Her eyes were brimming, but her voice held. I ran. I had nothing. No friends, no home, just my name, and even that was ruined. Calder remained silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window. Outside, snow drifted lazily past the glass. You know, he said slowly, when I first saw you in that alley, you were shaking, hungry, scared. But when that man grabbed your wrist, you still said no. He turned to face her. I've watched you gather eggs in a storm. I've seen you burn your fingers on the stove and keep cooking. Anyway, you rise before dawn. You fix what you break, and you never once asked for pity. Eliza blinked, unable to breathe. I don't care what they said back in Kansas, he said. I know who you are. He paused, voice steady. I know who you are when you bend down to feed the hens in the bitter cold. Her lips parted, and then the tears came, not hot and bitter like before. These were quiet, slow, full. She covered her face with both hands, shoulders trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not trying to." "You don't have to explain," Calder said, and his voice was low, almost rough. "Not Tome." For the first time, Eliza wept. Not because she was afraid, but because someone believed her without needing proof. The wind had shifted by late morning. Harder now, colder. It snapped through the bare branches of the cottonwoods and moaned through the cracks in the barn wall like a warning. Eliza stood on the porch with a pail in hand, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Something in the air felt different. She heard the hoofbeat-tats before she saw him. A single rider approached along the trail, shoulders squared, coat too fine for the frontier. Royce Blackwell rode like he owned the land beneath him. When he reached the fence that bordered the yard, he didn't dismount. He just sat, reins loose in one hand, a folded paper in the other. Calder stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He moved toward the fence with unhurried steps, placing himself between Royce and the house. Eliza froze, still on the porch. "Afternoon, sir," Royce called, voice smooth as varnish. "Heard you'd settled in nicely, Eliza. Cozy little life you've carved for yourself." Calder didn't respond. His body blocked the gate, broad, shoulders squared. "I have legal authority here," Royce continued. He held up the paper. "Signed by a magistrate in Dodge. She's to be remanded to family custody." Calder didn't move. "She's not going anywhere," he said. Royce laughed. "You don't get to decide that, rancher. I do when it's my land, my fence, and my gate." Royce's jaw flexed. "She's not who you think she is." "I know exactly who she is," Calder said. "Now turn that horse around." "I don't think you understand," Royce replied, voice sharpening. "That woman is a liar, a thief. She embarrassed my family, humiliated her own. She's a danger to your reputation." "If you want to talk about reputations," Calder said calmly, "let's start with what really happened in Kansas. About the girl in the library, the theft that never was." Royce's smile slipped. "I suggest you mind your tongue," he said coldly. Calder stepped closer to the gate, boots crunching in the snow. "If you plan to come through this gate," he said, "you'll have to go through me." Royce narrowed his eyes. Then, with a flick of his coat, he drew a revolver and leveled it at Calder's chest. Elisa gasped, the pail slipping from her hand and crashing against the port steps. Calder didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply looked at the pistol and said, "That gun you're holding, is it meant to bring someone home or to hide what you did?" The wind went still. Royce's hand wavered. "Just slightly. Enough." "Don't play righteous with me," Royce snapped. "You don't know a damn thing." "I know she said no," Calder replied. "And I know that matters more than your family name." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Then Royce cursed under his breath, holstered the gun, and jerked the reins. His horse reared, then turned. "She'll regret this," he said over his shoulder. "So will you," Calder didn't answer. He stood there unmoving until Royce vanished into the trees. Then, and only then, did he turn toward the house. Eliza stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame. Their eyes met across the yard, and without a word, Calder nodded once, just once, as if to say, "You're safe for now." The snow had begun to soften, curling in wet clumps along the eaves of the house. Thesicles that once hung like blades now dripped slowly in the early sun. Spring was not here, not yet, but it was thinking about arriving. Inside the house, something else had begun to thaw. Elisa found herself humming in the kitchen. At first, it startled her. The sound of her own voice, light and unguarded, floating in the morning air. But she did not stop. She kept stirring the pot, letting the tune rise along with the scent of cinnamon and boiled oats. The kitchen had become hers, not in name but in rhythm. She reorganized the cupboards, lined jars along the shelves, folded linens into neat stacks. A blue cloth now covered the center table, and wild sage hung drying near the window. Calder never said a word about the changes, but he sat there more often now, even when he had no reason to, reading by the stove, sharpening tools, watching her move through the space like a lighthouse keeper, tending her flame. One morning, she found an old leather-bound notebook on her bed, blank pages, a fountain pen tucked neatly inside. She knew it was from him. That night, she opened the book and stared at the first page for a long time. Her hand trembled as she wrote the date. Then slowly, carefully, she began again. It wasn't poetry or elegant prose, just thoughts, pieces of memory, a map back to herself. She wrote of the cold, of the hens, of the smell of pine and Kader's coat. She wrote of Kansas, of the night she nearly gave up, of the warmth of milk outside her door. She did not write the word love, but it was there, hidden in the way the ink curled. Calder began to laugh more. Not loud or often, but sometimes when she made some offhand joke while kneading bread or burned the stew again and threw the spoon across the room with dramatic flair, he chuckled. A real, low, amused sound that made her smile even before. She realized she was smiling. Then came the day she heard hammering. She stepped outside to find him sawing timber near the barn. "What are you building?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. He looked up, shrugged. "You'll see." For the next week, he worked every afternoon. Quiet, steady, sweat along his brow despite the cold. He refused to say more. Then, one evening near dusk, he called her from the porch. She followed him around the side of the house where a new doorway had been cut, an addition built directly beside the kitchen wall. He opened the door for her. Inside was a small square room, the windows facing west to catch the sunset. Light poured in gold across the bare wooden floor. Against one wall stood a bookshelf already half filled with books. There was a small desk, a chair, and beside it a worn but comfortable armchair near the window. She stepped inside, overwhelmed. "I called her," she breathed. "What is this?" He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "Reading room," he said simply, "for someone who knows what words are worth." She turned toward him. He didn't meet her eyes at first. Then he did. And in that look, steady, open, unflinching, she saw all the things he would not say aloud, all the words unspoken. She stepped toward him, hand brushing the edge of the desk. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded once. Felt like the house needed it. And for a moment the silence between them was louder than any confession. They said nothing else, but in that quiet space filled with light and books and warmth, built nail by a man who saw her, she understood. No one had said love, but it was everywhere. It was just past noon when the storm rolled in. Not of snow or wind, but of footsteps and accusation. Royce Blackwell returned. Heroda not alone this time, but with two men flanking him, silent, broad-shouldered figures with hard eyes and stiff posture. They stopped at the edge of the property as Calder stepped out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag already stained with oil. Royce dismounted first, his boots crunching over the thawing ground. "I warned you," he said flatly. Calder said nothing. Royce reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. This time it's official testimony's affidavit. She forged letters, took money, names to prove it. Eliza stepped onto the porch, gaze steady, spine straight. "None of it's true," she said, her voice calm but shaking. Royce turned toward her. "Then come defend yourself back east or let them drag you from this shack." "If I must leave," she said softly, "I will go." "No," Calder said sharply. He didn't look at her. Not yet. "No one's dragging her anywhere." Eliza reached for his arm, called to her. He shook his head. "I've stood silent once before. Watched someone I loved get taken because I thought justice would sort itself out." Now he turned to her. "I won't make that mistake again." He looked back at Royce. "You want to use the law? Then we'll use it too. But fair." Royce smirked. "How do you plan to do that?" Calder's eyes didn't waver. "By making her my wife." Thessalance was absolute. Elisa's breath caught. Royce scoffed. "You think marriage nullifies criminal charges?" "No," Calder said. "But it gives her the right to be heard as a citizen of this town. It keeps men like you from dragging her out like livestock, and it puts her under the protection of my name, my house, and this land." He turned to Eliza, thankfully. "I won't force you," he said, "but if you say yes, we do it today in front of the town, in front of God. Then I stand beside you when we face this lie." She looked at him. Really looked at the scar, the quiet strength. The man who'd built her a room just to hold her words. "I never wanted to be saved," she said, tears threatening. "I only wanted to be believed." "I'm not saving you," he replied. "I'm standing beside someone who already survived." Her lips trembled. "Yes," she whispered. That evening, just before sundown, the townsfolk gathered in the square, drawn by rumor and curiosity. The blacksmith's wife brought flowers from her cold windowsill. Sheriff Langley showed up in full coat. The pastor dusted off his book and cleared his throat with surprise. Eliza stood beneath the awning of the church in a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself. Calder beside her wore the same coat he'd worn the day they met. Patched but clean. Call her stiff. When the pastor asked if he took her hand in marriage, Calder replied with only 2 words, "I do." Then he turned to the small crowd, not just townsfolk, but Royce too. Arms crossed, lips twisted. Calder spoke plainly. "I didn't marry Eliza Monroe to save her from anything. I married her because I watched her rebuild herself from nothing. Because she rose every morning in the cold and made this house a home. Because when the world told her she was broken, she kept standing." He looked at her. "I didn't rescue her. I witnessed her, and I chose to walk beside someone who doesn't give up." Tears streaked down Eliza's cheeks for once. No one whispered, no one questioned, and Royce, his mouth pressed tight, turned and walked away, not in triumph, but in silence. The days grew longer. Snow melted into the thirsty earth, and wild flowers began to break through the soil in bursts of color. Children chased one another past fences. The hens clucked louder in the warming light. Spring had come. So had justice. Royce Blackwell was arrested 2 weeks after the wedding, not for the false accusations against Eliza, but for the other lies he'd left scattered behind him like broken glass, fraud, forgery, attempted coercion. When the town sent word to Kansas authorities, they confirmed what many had long suspected. Royce had been running from his own sins. The law had finally caught up. Calder barely spoke of it. When the telegram came, he read it once, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer beside the deeds to his land. Eliza never asked to see it. Some endings did not need to be relived. Instead, they built together. End of poem. This book ends with the marriage I tried. At the back of the house, just past the newly mended fence and beside the apple tree that had begun to bud, Calder began construction on a second addition. He did not say what it was at first, but Eliza knew. She helped carry wood, picked out the paint herself, warm cream with blue trim. She chose the windows tall and wide, facing the west hill, where the wind always spoke the softest. When it was finished, he handed her the key. "For the writer," he said. She stepped inside the room and saw what he'd built. A desk facing the hill, a shelf already waiting for her journals, and in the corner, a rocking chair beside a small stove. Eliza pressed her hand to the wall. "You built this for me," she said quietly. Calder nodded. "I built it for the words you haven't written yet." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Stay," she said. "Just for a minute." He did. Weeks later, Eliza opened the first free schoolhouse on the prairie, a one-room building donated by the church and furnished with benches made by Calder's own hands. Children from nearby homesteads came with slates, wide eyes, and muddy boots. Some had never held a pencil, others had never been told their names mattered on paper. Eliza taught them letters and numbers, and how to listen for meaning beneath noise. She taught them stories, real ones, imagined ones. She told them the sky was not a ceiling, just a starting point. She always smiled when she said it. The townspeople stopped whispering her name. They started greeting her in the market. The baker began setting aside extra bread. The sheriff tipped his hat a little lower and called her, though still quiet, laughed more when she laughed. He kissed her hand before supper and rubbed her shoulders after long days. He never asked her to forget the past. He simply gave her space to grow beyond it. Sometimes in the late afternoon, Eliza would sit in her writing room and look out across the hills. The wind would lift through the open window, tugging at her pages, and she would write not just for herself, but for the girl who once thought survival was the best she could hope for. The last line in one of her journals read, "The day I knocked on the door of Three Pines Ranch. I thought I was trading my body for shelter, but what I was really given was a home and a man who believed in me enough to build another room just for my future." And so, from a storm-beaten porch in Snow Ridge to a sunlit room built for stories, Eliza Monroe found more than survival. She found dignity, purpose, and a love that didn't ask her to be perfect, only honest. In a land where the cold could take you and the past could haunt you, she rose, not because someone saved her, but because someone saw her. And that sometimes is all we need. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you believe in love that builds, heals, and stays, then hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Every week, we bring you timeless tales of romance, redemption, and resilience from the untamed heart of the American frontier, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a story that just might stay with you long after the last word.